Welcome to Fire University. This is a podcast dedicated to fire ecology and management within the Natural Resource University Podcast Network. My name is Dr. Marcus Lashley. I'm a wildlife biologist, an assistant professor of disturbance ecology at the University of Florida, and a lifelong hunter that's passionate about wildlife conservation and management. In this podcast, I will interview scientists and professionals not only on the latest research in fire ecology, but also about their experiences, in hopes that you as the listeners can learn why fire ecology is important and also how you can use it to meet your natural resource management goals. So let's get to the burning questions in Fire University. Welcome back to Fire University. So today, I'm here with several graduate students, and we are all in northern Mississippi, and I guess they've graduated now. I call them graduate students, as former graduate students.
If we haven't, I don't know about that.
Yeah. Did I sign your thesis? I can't remember.
Digitally, the whole COVID way.
Yeah, the COVID way. So, so Rainer Nichols, Mariah Bogus, and Jacob Dykes sitting here with me that wanted to talk to everybody about what they've learned about fire over these past several years. And even a couple of you, I guess, still use fire for one reason or another. Rainer, probably most directly, you're actually a fire manager, right?
Yeah, that's right. I'm a prescribed fire program manager over at Camp McCain and Camp Shelby in Mississippi, the two military installations in the state.
Yeah, so two pretty big areas. Y'all use fire quite a bit to meet objectives from several different angles, I'm guessing.
Yeah, several different angles varying to, ensuring military training all the way down to managing for threatened and endangered species such as the gopher tortoise and black pine snake.
Nice. So you're burning for snakes.
That's right.
Do y'all do RCW work down there?
We do, but
Red cockaded woodpecker.
we have them on Camp Shelby, but they're mostly on DeSoto, so
Okay.
they really handle most of the
Yeah.
DeSoto National Forest.
I'm getting really used to abbreviations. I like
Yeah.
using more than ever now.
So, well, speaking of that, what is your abbreviation now?
I work for INDNR.
Yeah,
Indiana DNR.
I was like, IND. That doesn't spell anything.
Yeah. Indiana Department of Natural Resources, the deer biologist for Division of Fish and Wildlife.
Yeah, so the state deer biologist now.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess they didn't give you a fire position. Is that because you weren't able to get any of your stuff to burn?
They heard I'm too effective, actually.
So
not doing fire now.
It was yeah.
Yeah, they didn't want the whole state to burn.
I see.
There's too many hardwoods up there to burn.
Yeah. So, do you use fire at all in your job now?
I personally don't, and I'll be curious to see on some of our public areas in the future, because I'm new up there, like over dormant season, whether or not there's any burning, but from the looks of it, I don't think much happens with fire in Indiana. And that's looking at federal land and state land. I know there's some small prescribed fires, but I don't see big stands being burned.
Yeah. So not as big of a part of the culture there as it is here in the South. No,
and the interesting thing is, especially where I live, like the federal and state land around there, there used to be a lot of timber harvesting up until 20 or 30 years ago, and it's gotten so much harder for them to cut trees. Mm-hmm. So if you look back at like the aerial imagery, like scouting for deer, like I've done on these public areas, you'll see these cuts, and they're just less and less. And even when they cut now, it's like 4 or 5 acres, these little group selections for oak regen. But every time they put up a bid for a stand to be cut, they just get hit with all these lawsuits. And that's like National Forest Service and
so
any
it's
state,
difficult
any
to
agency.
Get sunlight down to the ground.
Yeah, which is why, like we talked about, disturbance is going away, and it's the same in the central hardwoods as it is in the Appalachians. I would say the South is the holdout with that. We have a lot.
Yeah, a lot of disturbance, and it's really interesting to look at that spatially because you have different trials and tribulations and limitations and restrictions and things that play into it and why that's going away in different places. But it's interesting to hear your perspective because I don't have as much experience up in that part of the world as I do in several others, and it's interesting to hear that perspective. Well, speaking of different perspective, we have Jacob Dykes here as well, and you didn't study fire necessarily when you were working with me, but you were involved with fire quite a bit, and I know that you've learned a lot about it. And now you've moved to an even farther removed, I guess, place than Mariah did. So where are you at, Jacob?
So I'm working on a PhD in South Texas at Texas A&M University Kingsville with the Caesar Kleberg Wildlife Research Institute. So I currently don't have any abbreviations. I'm forever a student, it seems like. But yeah, it's kind of been a huge change moving from the Southeast, which I've done quite a bit with fire. Just taking advantage of opportunities and stuff, and now going to South Texas, it's a big difference, but it's a valuable tool nonetheless. Managing some of the native rangelands and stuff out there, it's a tool that's often used. So
yeah. So what do you think is the most common use of fire in that part of the world?
I'm relatively new to it. You see people sometimes use it for brush management, but most of the time you're seeing them put it on the rangelands themselves. Mm-hmm. Some kind of rotation with cattle grazing or something like that. And
so is it like a patch burn, patch burn grazing model?
Mm-hmm, exactly. Yep. And some species they use fire like we do everywhere for non-desirable species, try to get rid of those, and then promote beneficial species of plants. Yeah. So yeah, there's some large scale studies going on. That's one thing that's been a big difference, is going from burning in pine plantations and hardwoods to now we're lighting these 1,000-acre fields on fire, and it's pretty impressive to see.
Well, it's pretty interesting. We had Dr. Sam Fullendorf on a recent episode to talk about patch burn grazing and how important that is in his part of the world, and learned a lot of really cool stuff about it. So maybe we'll circle back around to that. I thought it'd be fun for us all to get together, and we're at a place right now that I think is kind of special to all of us, and I'm trying to do the same thing. Our listeners have probably listened to the other Upland Hardwood episode that we had, and I was actually there with all of my lab mates from a couple of decades, right? That we're all going back to the same place and hunting together, and I'm trying to create the same kind of thing here, and glad that you guys were able to come. But I think it's really fun for I've built some really close friends over the years coming back to that hunt with Craig Harper, and I'm trying to create that same sort of thing here, and I'm glad you guys are still trying to come back, and hopefully you're having a lot of fun. I think you'll build the really tight relationships with people over the years from this type of experience. So hopefully we can keep that going. But I thought it'd be fun for us to all sit down and talk about your experience. I know you got some experience during graduate school, and you may have even got some before that where you were really thinking about the research side of fire and trying to learn, different things about it. I thought it would be really fun to hear your perspective on what you feel like you learned when you were going through school, and the things, I guess, that made an impact on you when you were learning those. So does anybody have anything that kind of sticks out to them for something really awesome that you learned about it, or, some sort of gee whiz fact or anything like that?
Man, the thing that got me with prescribed fire that blew my mind is just how many different animals they'll respond to
that magnet effect.
That magnet effect. That's what really got me interested in prescribed fire, and of course for my master's project I was looking at how that affected deer use, and seeing if you could use fire to change when deer use landscape the most. Mm-hmm. But yeah, that was the number one thing for me, just that magnet effect that it's causing. Even to the degree, like when I was burning up at Camp McCain the other day, I was going through running a strip head fire, and I looked behind me. There's turkeys jumping the flames, getting in the black.
Wow.
Already starting.
Already after it. One time I was at a training. I was doing a presentation on fire, and one of the folks in the crowd came up to me afterwards, and he said something to me, and it just was instinctual. I said, "Well, why do you think turkeys are black?" it immediately was like, that's actually a pretty good idea. What?
Their redhead replicate the flame? Is that
yeah, maybe that's it. I don't know. But I know one thing, I have seen that happen, not necessarily jumping over the flame, but I've seen them standing on smoky logs a few times.
Yeah.
And it's pretty impressive, especially with turkeys, how quickly they're on top of it. I know that we've had instances, I talk about the one, I'm not going to bring it up again, but it was at the place that we're at where I bought the small scale fire and the turkey roosting. But it was also pretty cool. For some of these studies, we learned really quickly that when we burn, a lot of this work we're doing with cameras. So we have a camera, on tree, and we have them gridded out, and everybody, I guess, everybody here has worked with cameras extensively, but you don't want to burn and leave the camera out in it, right?
We extensively is an understatement on the cameras.
Right. So you don't want to leave, the camera's knee high essentially out in the woods, and you don't want to leave those up everywhere, especially when there's 100 of them. So you have to go out and remove all those, and we burn, but it was pretty important to get the cameras in right away after the fire had gone through, because you'll miss stuff.
Yeah.
Things are on it so quick.
I like talking about like what Rainer was, the response of animals. One of the cooler things for me that I've noticed strictly in upland hardwoods is the plant response, where like we know what we should see as far as structure. I always think of what the response of the understory as like a structural response, and like obviously the
not
structure,
necessarily compositional.
Yeah, and like the structure is determined by the composition, but we never really think about I never really thought about the species. The first couple times I burned back home in North Carolina, upland hardwoods, I hadn't even thinned at all. I did a dormant season burn. There's nothing in the understory. And, a month or two after that burn in spring, there's partridge pea popping up. So there's an annual plant that was there that guarantee would have never seen. And it's already showing up in that burn because we created a place to, for it to grow. And in other species, like that I use even like hunting is like, if I'm out in the woods and I want to get an idea of if a place was burned in the past, there's indicator species like, I always think of obviously like American burnweed, but even like mare's tail or horseweed is a decent one. Like those annuals that pop up right after fire. It is so cool that even if those aren't the highest quality plants for whatever species we're managing for, how much they respond to fire, just as much as the turkey, And then obviously we see the deer responding to that.
Well, another thing I found interesting, we were all at one of your plots from your research yesterday, removing some of the stuff from the woods. And I noticed when we got into the burned unit that several of the Midstory hardwoods were not actually top killed by the fire, but they had some epicormic branching out around the base of it. And even that was a pretty good indicator that the fire had happened and damaged those stems, and they responded in that way. So really interesting to think about. So I agree. Both of those things are really interesting. The magnet effect, on wildlife, that was one thing that I have been really strongly interested in. I think all of us are, because a lot of the game species, right, the ones that we all are here for right now, are generally strongly attracted to it, and that's really interesting. And also the plant community, you have these species respond to it. But one of the things that I found really interesting, and Rainer's data I think show it from his experiment really well, is that fire and wildlife are interacting to affect what plants are doing as well, and I think that's pretty cool. So Rainer, in your experiments, I don't remember exactly the details, you probably remember better, but essentially you had fire during the normal time, we'll say, for everybody. So what month was that in?
We were burning during the month of March.
So March was our normal treatment, right?
Yep.
So and this was all in loblolly plantation, right?
Mid-rotation loblolly pine stands.
Yeah. So, and relatively low basal area.
Yep. Yep, I would say anywhere between 60 to 80.
Yeah, 60 to 80. So relatively low compared to the average landowner, at least. Not necessarily as low as we would want it if we were managing for northern bobwhite, for instance, but relatively low compared to the average landowner. And Yeah, so, and then you had another treatment. What was the other fire timing?
Comparing it to lightning season fire, which we conducted during the month of June.
Okay, so you were lighting fire during June.
Yep.
Did you follow the pines at all in that?
Is that what?
The overstory pine trees?
We had no mortality that I know of.
Did you say no?
No mortality.
You burned it during the summer?
Yes.
And you didn't kill any trees?
No overstore.
Interesting. I don't know that most people would have thought that.
Yeah, it's something a lot of people are timid about doing is those late growing season burns, lightning season burns, just because of the stress it puts on the trees. But if you're strategic with it, not trying to burn too much property at once,
right,
doing proper firing techniques to keep those flame heights low and low intensity, you can definitely get away with it for sure. It's definitely doable and possible, especially, I mean, again, if you're strategic. You can go in and do that burn, so it's going to rain 2 days later, that rain's going immediately. Yeah. If there was any scorch, that'll help them come back.
Well, and this is something that with the firing techniques, we have an upcoming episode. We're going to talk about that quite a bit. Yeah. And so we'll talk about how you might change your lighting pattern to accomplish some of those things. But I mean, I wish that I could have been out there and done all of this with you guys all the time, but the reality was I wasn't out there all the time. But I do remember going out to your site on one of the properties, and there were Midstory sweet gum in that thing. I mean, we're talking about 8 to 10, 15 foot even tall trees, full, just a full stand of it under that. And I remember burning in March on one of them. And then I remember going out on a June fire on one of them and then coming back and actually seeing what happened. So during the June fire that I was on, you have 9 or 10 reps of this, but the one that I made it to during June, I remember coming back and looking at that specific stand. I even have some footage so that I can put that online to show people what I'm talking about. But when I came back to that, or let's back up. We used firing techniques that had a relatively low flame intensity. So I remember the fires being like knee high or lower for the entire burn. It took a little while to burn it, but it kind of meandered. The fire meandered through the stands, and I remember thinking, man, it just, it's such a low flame height. These sweet gums in the Midstory, we're not going to do anything to them.
But it's probably a hot day, right? I mean, it's probably 85,
95 degrees, I think.
Yeah, it was warm, and it's getting a little too warm where you might rather be in the swimming pool or something, instead of holding a drip torch next to you. But
you don't have to light a fire to know that. I'll say that.
Yeah, so most people can probably relate to that. But I just remember thinking, man, all these Midstory hardwoods, especially sweet gum, we're not going to do anything to that. But you remember what happened to it?
Man, we smoked the sweet gums.
I mean,
we came back and
there were almost no stems alive, and they were top killed, right? So they were resprouting from it. Although I'm not sure that the survival was very high. It definitely killed some of them outright, but for the most part, we're top killing the plants. But I just could not believe that little piddly fire that meandered through there killed those trees. Top killed them.
Yeah, it was something else. Especially it was kind of a picture perfect comparison because one side of the road was that March fire and the other side was that June fire, and it was just cool how just simple as when you're dropping a match out in the woods can change that much. Yeah,
that's quite the contrast from your summer fires, Mariah.
Yeah, fires. What fires?
I remember pouring the fuel to it, trying to get it to go, and even. So you want to tell them a little bit about this? So we had a very similar design in mind for your experiment, but it was upland hardwood system.
Right. So they're upland hardwoods, but the species composition is not necessarily. Well, it varies from what you may think of like in the Appalachians. So like our upland hardwoods here, we have some scarlet oak that's very limited. We have some southern red oak, which I would say is definitely an upland species. But there's also cherry bark mixed in a couple of those stands. There's some Shumard oaks. There's some species that definitely like a little bit moister soil. So it's somewhat of a mixed stand. And then we had winged elm in there. We had sweet gum in there. Some red maple. Some encroachment of more mesec species.
We have an upcoming episode where we're going to talk about the mesification of these forests and basically some of these water-loving species that suppress fire and how important that fuel contribution was. But you got to see that firsthand, right?
Yeah. So tried to burn. I think I personally tried to burn like 4 or 5 times while I was here, and I think y'all had tried
just
at
like
least
a test
once
fire
before. Yeah, that was a couple times. It was everyone came up here and we had 8 or 10 people show up and equipment and stuff, and we couldn't get to burn 5 feet, and it was a waste of time.
Yeah. So there's a couple of things I think about that. One, I remember coming up at least once where we had a whole crew show up and we had picked, I don't remember what the exact conditions were, but it was the lowest relative humidity day that we had had in a long time.
It's probably 36 is what I remember.
Yeah, it was in mid-30s.
Mid to high 30s.
Yeah, and 6 to 8 mile an hour wind speeds or something like that. And, just a really good day for burning. And it still wouldn't do anything. Why do you think that was?
Well, it was because the ground moisture was still very high because we had rain within, I think, a week or a week and a half, which if we had enough air movement and sunlight in those stands, it could have dried them out. And that's something that, like in dormant season, in dormant season, you naturally have drier air. So those stands can dry out more quickly because the humidity in Mississippi in summer is right around that 90% most days and even high 90s. So there's not much of an opportunity for the site to dry out. And I think by the end of it, I'd figured out it was going to take at least 2 or 2.5 weeks with no rain and somewhat dry air conditions. And then low 30s relative humidity, 230. I honestly would have liked to have tried it in the 20s to actually make it burn. And then a wind to move the air around. Because even when you have that 6 mile an hour wind, if you have leaves on the trees and you're in the interior of a forest, like there's just no air movement. And that's another thing we were fighting.
You're not getting any of that, no evaporation whatsoever. Yeah, we talked about that in one of I think the episode when I was in Tennessee, we talked about how, as soon as fire reaches the shade, it immediately just, takes all the energy out of it. And it's definitely, was really interesting and a good learning experience for all of us, right? We tried to pick the conditions to get in there, and there are just a lot of things playing against us. And in some ways, upland hardwoods like that might be a little more difficult to deal with than in other types of stands.
I've had that similar experience in upland hardwoods in dormant season. I can think of a couple stands I was trying to burn a few years ago, and I would get like 30. I remember trying to burn it one day. It was 10 mile an hour winds, low 30 humidity. Like I was about as chancy as I was willing to go on the fire weather, and it would not burn. And that's when I really learned the lesson of the moisture. Your fuel moisture is every bit as important as the actual conditions that day. You can't just cherry pick a day and hope it works.
Just out of curiosity, Mariah, were you keeping up with the KBDI, Keeps Fire on Drought Index? Was it low or was the highest?
I wasn't using it. Okay. No, I should have, because that would have given me an indicator of the effect of historical moisture on fuel loads. But I was more just eyeballing it, and we see where it got me. But it was like, I think those...
Didn't you study acorns instead or something like that?
Yeah, I switched over to something I didn't have to light on fire. Yeah, but so like this is back home in North Carolina. I figured out that year I finally got a good burn in, and it was actually early growing season because it didn't happen till first or second week of May, and everything had greened up. But the reason that worked that day was that I had low 30s humidity, I had a lot of wind, and it hadn't rained for a week and a half or 2 weeks. And that's in dormant season when you have just about full sunlight getting to the forest floor to dry it out, and drier air. Yeah. And you're talking about the difference between hardwoods and pines, and you think about the texture of the fuels. And if you have, say, a white oak leaf laying on the ground or a chestnut oak leaf or whatever, there's so much more surface area that's underneath that leaf that's not exposed to air compared to pine duff, where each leaf is so small, each needle, that the air can move through it so much more easily.
Yeah, and chemically, the chemistry of them is quite different. Yeah, we're going to talk about that quite a bit in an upcoming episode when we're thinking about different kinds of fuels. But yeah, it's really interesting to, trying to burn in these different systems and, thinking about these different effects. In some cases, like what we were studying with Rainers, even, we have this interaction where you burn, and it depends on the timing of the fire directly has implications for which plants are surviving it or being top killed, and how many of them has implications for how the strategy that you use, how fun it is for some people. But it also changed the timing of wildlife use and even which plants they were choosing to eat when they came in there, right?
That's right, and that's what I found, really awesome when it came to that. You basically termed the term mineral stumps, but we were creating those mineral stumps like you were talking about with sweet gum out there on the landscape, but on
10
a
acres
huge scale, as compared to actually creating stump sprouts or mechanically creating stump sprouts.
Right. Jacob was out there with me on that original experiment where we actually just went out there and cut a bunch of trees down. You remember that?
Yeah, that was fun stuff. That was kind of mind-blowing how that all came to be. I mean, I guess it's something that was, it's obvious. We've all walked past that stump that's sprouting, and it's been just demolished by deer and whatever else. And I've never paid attention to them. So that was kind of a really neat project.
Yeah, so you were in there. I mean, you had a lot of, you didn't study fire per se for your master's, but you had a lot of legacy knowledge, we'll call it.
Yeah.
I'd like to think you were the first student to graduate, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Were you the first one to graduate from the lab at all?
Yeah.
Yeah.
First one,
That's what I was thinking. So you're the legacy knowledge here.
He proved it could be done. It was possible.
It can happen.
I paved the way.
Yeah.
No, it's been really neat being closely related, and I'm learning stuff on this podcast right now, of course, because these guys know fire much better than me. But I've had the opportunity to be pretty close with it, and y'all have brought in some really good points about how it differs in pine straw versus oaks and stuff like that. I mean, if you've ever tried to rake wet leaves, it kind of goes to what you were saying. It sticks together, doesn't want to dry out, and it's just been really, really interesting. I think the coolest thing to me early on learning about fire was it's got a negative attitude about it. A lot of people I think are intimidated by it, and learning the utility of it and how, like Rainer said, it can benefit a plethora of different species, and it can be done in 1,000 different ways to reach management goals. It's really, really neat. I mean, you can study fire in itself and learn forever,
Yeah. And that's been the interest all along, right? It's that we're all wildlife enthusiasts. I think all of us got into this business because we grew up hunting and fishing, and that's kept on with this, this line of work that we're in. But just seeing wildlife respond, and then taking it further, like Rainer's stuff, where we're actually seeing the wildlife respond, and you're talking about those resprouting plants, and man, like we had deer in there chowing down on those things, and then depending on when you burned them and when they were resprouting, and it would change which plants deer preferred, and which ones were actually surviving and dominating in the plant community based on the timing affecting plants, and then affecting how deer affected plants, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, it was definitely a cool project. I really enjoyed my time looking at everything, and I'm sure you're still looking at some things from it too. But I've learned a lot from that project, and I was glad to be the one to do it.
Yeah, I think that we will learn a lot from it, just in general from a science standpoint. There were some really interesting things, and we were linking a bunch of ideas, and that's one of the things that I really like about several of these fire projects, and some of the other ones that we'll talk about in future podcast episodes. We were building on this idea that the timing might matter, and we were trying to do that in different systems, and had a student work in Prairie, one working in South Mississippi and Longleaf, and then tried to do it in upland hardwoods, and then you did it in the loblolly pine plantations, So we were trying to look at some of these ideas, across all these different systems. And unfortunately, it didn't work out as well for Mariah because he's not a pyrophyte, apparently.
I'm curious whether there's actually been a true burn day for those stands since their creation in 2018. A summer burn day.
It rains every day. It's raining right now.
Yeah, I'd say there probably hasn't been. So this was a drier year, so maybe this year would have worked as soon as I left, probably.
Well, I think that's pretty telling, and we're going to talk about this in one of the next few episodes. The forest structure has changed, and it's something that's pretty concerning in the upland hardwood systems across the U.S. And it's part of that story is because we have not had fire in them, but when you start to shift that species composition away from some of these species like oaks that are fire loving and upland hardwoods, and you get into you start getting into these closed canopy conditions like you were talking about, where for much of the year we're not getting sunlight into the ground because it's closed canopy, and we have a high part of the fuel load or species that are not quote fire loving species. It starts to get pretty difficult to get fire in that system, and it becomes nearly impossible to get it in there in the season where it historically would have been relatively common.
Yeah, and it's a negative feedback because the lack of fire is what's promoting the structure, and that structure is what's promoting your ability to put fire on the ground, which is why
as it goes further, they're essentially engineering their own ecosystem.
They are,
and they don't like fire. So
and to intercede, and it's like this project was to look at the difference between dormant and growing season. But like one takeaway I had was, if this were my property and I were trying to put fire in those stands and actually restore them back to an functioning upland hardwood system, I would be cutting out the problem trees, the problem species. But even sometimes that's not something you can do at least right away in a real large stand. That can take years. So it would have, if it were me, it would have been just burning when I could, which would have been that dormant season fire, burning it hot, trying to top kill some of those mesic species, at least getting fire on the ground, and consuming some of those historical fuels, because like the duff builds up and it gets matted down, it doesn't burn as well. And I've actually had that burn too well back home. I've had a couple times where we had to make fire breaks with our leaf blower and then go with a potato rake and dig down a couple inches because the ground was burning. You
had fuel accumulated.
Yeah, because it hadn't been burned in 20 or 30 years or longer. So that first burn there can be some unknowns you have to think about.
Yeah, we talked about that a little bit in the last episode, that you may approach things a little bit differently just sheerly because of how long it's been since you set fire. So I think that's a good point, and we can pivot a little bit on it. The stand that we're in a building right now, what we call the sharecropper house, but we're surrounded by an oak stand where we actually went in and did one of these treatments. So we actually went into the stand and did a hack and squirt operation. And in that, essentially what we were doing is looking at mid-story and overstory species that are those ones that you don't necessarily want in the stand. There's some of those invading species that are increasing in dominance because of the lack of fire. And I wasn't here when it happened, but I know once they went in and implemented that, they were getting a little more sunlight in, but especially when they reduced the litter contribution from those other species, those ones that aren't fire loving, they were able to burn it pretty well during the dormant season for that matter. It makes me wonder how well that stand would respond, or would it be more apt to be burned at other times of the year because of that treatment?
I think it would. And then if you even look at it right now, there's no mid-story. So think about air movement up this hill right now.
Yeah.
It obviously needs to be thinned again and burned because the understory is starting to decrease.
Yeah, so it's still, it's what is it, northeast facing or northwest?
Northwest, yeah.
Northwest facing slopes is a cooler aspect, but it's almost closed canopy. I'd say probably 80 to 85% canopy closure on average across the stand. So mostly closed canopy, but if we went in and removed those species like that, especially the Midstory, that was the main thing that we were going in and actually killing with a hatchet and herbicide injection.
Yeah.
It did seem to, accelerate getting fire back into that system.
It's similar in the structure with the lack of understory and midstory, or really the lack of midstory. It feels a lot like a shelter wood in there, but it's not, because the basal area is way too high. But I just think about shelter woods. If you've ever been a shelter wood in summer, it's actually quite pleasant because you have shade and you have all this air movement because that midstory is lacking. It's more pleasant than the longleaf pine stem.
Do you know how many tens of thousands of leaves I pulled off plants in the shelter woods on the side of a mountain in East Tennessee? That's what I was doing during my master's.
I spent a month doing it once, and I was not the most pleasant, especially because of blackberry everywhere.
Yeah.
Ideal for deer.
Let's pull the leaves off of every plant that deer will eat in here. That seemed like a good idea until I got in there doing it.
And the ticks.
Oh, yeah. Well, speaking of ticks, yeah, we're going to talk about that here coming pretty soon. There was something else that was really interesting, was just, we were following all kinds of things and trying to take advantage of the situation. And you have a bunch of gung-ho graduate students who start collecting all kinds of data. And one of the things that we collected, and we'll just talk about it real briefly, is tick data, right? I know that for me, when the red meat allergy became a thing, I got a little bit nervous about ticks, and then, for me... So
you made us go collect the ticks.
Yeah, so I was like, hey guys, go roll around and see how many ticks you can catch. So...
I remember my first day up here, you were telling me how bad the ticks were. It's like my first or second day on the job. And I got a bunch of ticks, and I thought to myself, if I can make it through 2 years down here and not get a tick-borne disease or a red meat allergy, I'll be doing really good.
Yeah.
Well, somehow that might have happened. I don't know.
The really interesting thing about this property is, it's upland hardwood. It's always been upland hardwood for the most part up here. And the landowner, that he's been living on it his entire life essentially, and hunting on it. He loved quail hunting when he was a kid. Now there aren't any quail, and we're trying to restore some back. But I asked him one time, what are the biggest things that have changed about this property over the years? And he said, well, there aren't any quail. And when I was a kid, there were quail everywhere. And I was like, okay. He said, yeah, when I was a kid, I didn't even, I rode around here quail hunting, walking around, playing in the woods, and didn't even know what a tick was.
Or a deer.
Yeah, or a deer for that matter. He didn't know what a deer was. And I was like, huh. So wait, you didn't have deer, you didn't have ticks, and then I immediately did what most people was like, I wonder if you have so many ticks because you have so many deer. Is that what it is? And I was thinking about that, and so I kept prodding him. I was like, well, what else? And he said, well, we used to, ride around, and when the brush was getting a little too thick for quail hunting, we'd pitch a match in it and see if it burned. If it burned, we'd let it go. And he said they just did that all the time. So he was, they were burning all the time. And now they don't burn at all. So, and we're trying to restore some of that, but I just thought that was really telling, and it really is a story that's happened everywhere, right? We have more deer in a lot of places, and much less fire in almost all places, and those two things are probably intersecting to affect something like tick abundance. And so we actually started looking at that, and you guys were, I guess interested enough that you were putting these traps out to catch ticks while you were thinking about all this. But really what stimulated that interest for me was the red meat allergy, because I don't want it.
Yeah. I mean, what?
And I couldn't figure out why is there so many ticks everywhere, and you guys were doing these really cool experiments, and it seemed like a good opportunity for us to try to understand two really major contributing factors and how they might play together to affect the abundance of ticks that we're seeing today. So what in general happened when you were looking at the ticks?
We caught a lot. That's what generally happened. We caught a lot on myself and on the traps.
Yeah.
Yeah, so in general, we'll hit the high points. Dormant season fire. And this is in the pine stands and in upland hardwoods did not affect tick abundance. So these were March fires.
So even though you burned, it didn't matter.
Yeah.
It's the same amount of ticks over 2 years.
Yeah. And so those were burned spring of 2018. And we measured ticks we trapped ticks at the end of August, beginning of September 2018 and 2019. Mm-hmm. And there was no effect of dormant season fire either year.
And in a normal burn season or burn rotation in these stands, or to meet most objectives, most people would be on a 3-year rotation. So you essentially looked at the year of, the year after, and then the next one you'd be burning again, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So
then the next piece that falls into this is the growing season fire, which, as we talked about, we did not have that treatment in the upland hardwood stand, so we couldn't look at that. But in the pine stand and on Rayner's study site, it decreased tick loads. It decreased them for both years.
Yes, for 2 years you had a substantial reduction.
Summer 2018 and 2019, there was a lot less ticks.
I'm sure we'll get into this more, and we've been working on those data sets. We just met with some other researchers about that, and we'll probably circle back around on another episode. But it was pretty interesting to think about the timing of fire. We have the same practice, and that's something that we normally all are not thinking about. I mean, we certainly are thinking about ticks when we're walking around in the woods, and we don't want them, but we're not necessarily thinking about tweaking a practice, especially the same practice, to manage things like ticks. And that data is some preliminary evidence to strongly suggest that we might ought to be thinking about timing. And in stands like, we may need some other intervention to think about timing in stands like what you worked in, Mariah, for your master's. The
scariest thing about that too is I think 99% of those ticks we caught, 99% were Lone Star ticks, which is the tick, of course, responsible for red meat allergy and starry. They're definitely a tick you don't want on you. Right. So you have a reason to burn.
The thing that really was shocking to me about that whole thing, and I don't want to get into it in too much detail, but there's a laundry list of things that you can get.
Oh, we don't know. And there's illnesses out there we still don't know about. The one that really scares me is I, in my research, came across the how you can become temporarily paralyzed from a tick bite, where all of a sudden you just start.
I've heard of that with dogs.
You start losing your ability to move. You become debilitated, and if you don't find the tick, you wouldn't even be able to pick it off you. Someone picks it off of you, or you find it in time, and your movement will come back in an hour or two. But
tick paralysis.
Oh yeah, tick paralysis over a day, 24 hours.
Yeah, my girlfriend is she's finishing up vet school right now and had a case come in 2 months ago, and the dog just kind of in a week or so had become paralyzed, whole back end, and they found a tick, removed it, and within 24 hours was running around.
Wow, that's incredible. Can you imagine that?
Amazing.
Like if you were laid down in bed and couldn't wake up, like got up in the morning, could not get up, what would you be thinking?
Not ticks.
Yeah, it'd be like, I'm paralyzed and I don't know why.
That's crazy. Yeah, just a couple months ago. So I'd never heard of that either. So I was kind of mind blown. But
the point is you don't want to get bit by one.
Yeah.
And it's funny because
one way we might avoid getting bit by one is to use fire a little more. Yeah. Sounds like, especially if it's strategically during the year.
Because they're out. Found one today.
Did you really?
Yeah, over in the pine stand. Yeah, sitting up against a tree.
Got bit by something yesterday. It was a tick or a chigger. So
I didn't get bit. I found it in time. But
while we're off on a tangent about using fire to manage, kind of species that.
Oh, you're going to circle us back? That's what I was about to do.
Marcus is over here just turning green. He can't wait to get this back on track.
The audience
to the fire.
Don't really.
Yeah, I'm sorry. What did I miss? I stepped away for a minute.
We're going to talk about fire and what fire is.
Well, since we are on this, about species that audience really don't think of using fire to manage. One that you might appreciate and the audience might enjoy too is down there on Camp Shelby. They have a crayfish that is endemic to Camp Shelby.
Did you just say crayfish?
Crayfish is called the Camp Shelby burrowing crayfish. And we have to,
crawdad.
That's right. And it is,
endangered crawdad.
Yep. And so we have to go in, laws and regulations. We have to go in and manage those wetlands that that those crayfish are endemic to will prescribe fire to prevent that mesification from happening,
Wow.
as well as promote, pitcher plants that are also endemic to those wetlands.
Is there a particular time of year you have to do that in their life cycle for the crawfish?
I'm not 100% familiar with it yet. That's why I was saying I'm kind of excited to do some work with them. I don't know all the ecology behind the crayfish yet.
That's wild.
But
just, for what we do know about what you just said, you're burning in a wetland.
So
that seems
like
an oxymoron to begin with, unless you're in South Florida or somewhere like that has a wetland that always burns, like the Everglades. But yeah, just the seems counterintuitive that you're burning to, restore or maintain a wetland. So that's pretty interesting.
Must be in growing season then, if it's burning a wetland.
Probably during that historic lightning season fire when
kind of like
fire was carrying across the landscape.
Like the Pocosins and ephemeral ponds in like eastern North Carolina, those all need to burn, but they're a wet area that will hold water all winter, but then you burn in summer.
Yeah, that's really interesting. That something we haven't really talked about at all on the show is, the seasonality for something like a wetland could be incredibly important, just because, like you just said, the system literally might be underwater during the time that we would traditionally be burning a lot of the stuff in the South. So it's really interesting. Yeah, I certainly haven't been thinking about burning for crawfish, but I'm behind it.
You need to start
that.
Crawfish University now. It'll just be about eating crawfish though, because this is Mississippi, right?
Yeah.
Crawfish bowls.
Man, I do miss the crawfish
Oh,
bowls.
I do too.
They don't have those in Indiana, you know that?
Oh.
Yeah, they don't have much in Florida either.
I've got them going in
Around
Texas now, South Texas. We can get past this pandemic.
I think Dan's got them going in Montana.
Yeah. Now, we had at Mississippi State. We had them.
Man, we're talking about the core group now, and we're all over the world now. It seems like
Montana, Georgia, South Texas, all over the place. Indiana. That's good. That's a good reason for us to get together every year and do this.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Florida, the man himself's in Florida now. So
that's exactly right. We've all moved on with our lives to do different things, and you guys would have no way of even knowing who your other lab mates were if you didn't come back to something like this. And I think that's something that's been special for me. For Craig's lab, I don't even know how many students, almost all of them that have ever been in his lab, I know on a personal basis because of this type of event. And I think that's really has been special to me, and I'm excited to do that in the future with all of you. And hopefully we can keep this going and keep coming back. But that's exactly right. We're all moving to all these different places, and the other, if we flip that coin, something that's been rewarding on the other side of that is to see you all, be successful and take that knowledge to different places, keep some of it here, take it elsewhere. And that's also really cool to see that happen and watch everybody develop into their professions. So it's been really fun to watch that. Hopefully I'll get to continue to do that.
Yeah, I look forward to it every year. Anybody's familiar with the grad school grind, especially, is you got all these good ideas of how you're going to keep in touch, and then suddenly you hadn't talked in a year.
Yeah.
I didn't know Rainer was burning for crawfish, but
I didn't
know you did that. But
last time we talked about crawfish,
we were eating. Yeah, so you learned something, and this is a great thing. Year 3.
Yeah, it seems like the head count has gone down. The deer head count has gone down every year. But I guess that's because we're being effective. We're getting the population down.
We're going to call it that. We're going to call it effectiveness.
Yeah,
that's what it is.
And this is coming from one of the only ones that has not been effective.
I don't know. I've killed one. Marcus has not. So
I wasn't going to say it, but earlier when you were talking about the red meat allergy, you're the one that doesn't have to worry about it.
I will say I am mentoring a new hunter, so
there you go.
At least I'm doing that.
Under the bus.
I'm not No, it's not her fault. It's not her fault that we haven't got one.
Well, I'm not sure.
No,
if
I'm
you're
just
doing...
saying I'm at least doing the.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
You know, I'm trying to
It's too
continue.
dedicated to his
Although
podcast.
maybe I'm.
He sat in a stand yesterday doing a podcast. So
Yeah,
that
we
might
were
not-
podcasting in the
might,
stand.
Factor into not.
Yeah, they weren't far behind me. None of us seen anything.
Yeah,
You know, I'm kind of
could you
curious
hear
when
us?
they were talking. No,
Could you
but
hear us where you were?
now that I know you recorded a podcast in the stand, I'm kind of thinking maybe that had something to do with something.
Well,
the intro music they play, it just rings through the
Ah,
woods.
yeah, is that what it
all
is?
the banjos and the deer
No.
just know not to go over there.
I mean, you know, this is something that's really important. We're all working in the field, and we want people to love the resource like we do, and it's really important to do stuff like that. And you know, maybe I'm not the best mentor. I obviously haven't been successful, but at least I'm trying, guys. Okay, at least I'm trying.
I try to take someone every year, someone new, and it's fairly successful, but they always enjoy it at the end, you know? So I think that expectation that you have to kill something that's not necessary.
Yeah,
No, not at all.
yeah, it's not necessary, and it's not, you know, it's a small part of it, really.
Well, that's not why I'm here. I'm here
Yeah,
to
that's
catch
not why
up,
we're all
but
here
it's
for sure.
fun, you know, and it's the whole process is
Yeah,
it's a lot of fun. This is a
being
lot
able
of
to
times,
talk about this kind of stuff and learn from each
Exactly.
other. I mean, that's
Fun.
I
and
don't
most
get
of
to
us
see
are
you
in
guys
this
but once a
field
year.
because of our passion for the outdoors and hunting and that kind of stuff. So
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, thanks guys for coming up here. It's been real fun, and thanks for coming on the show. I think this was a really good episode, and I really appreciate you guys. Anybody have any take-home messages before we go?
Mine is always take a deep breath, wait a couple seconds before you squeeze the trigger.
I meant about 5. I know.
I've paid for three rounds this weekend.
Wow.
Listen,
and I got one.
I was gonna
did
say,
you
make
forget
sure you
which
gotta-
podcast we're on? Mariah has his own podcast. What's the name of it?
Hunt the Land.
Hunt the Land, and it's a hunting podcast, right?
Yeah, so there's lots of stories about missing deer and shooting deer and
Yeah.
how to hunt deer.
Oh, so
Actually,
you're going to be talking about this hunt on that one?
Yeah, I get all the nitty gritty details. But like
Yeah.
some of the things you talk about, and like it was
Mhm.
on the Deer University podcast, the research side of things,
Yeah.
we talk about from the hunting side, like acorns,
Yeah.
and that's
So-
my big thing.
So I think you gave us the take-home message from that show instead of Fire University.
All right, so my take-home message from Fire University is to just start burning. If you're in upland hardwoods, buy a leaf blower, borrow one. Man, the first time I burned, I didn't even have a drip torch. I don't even want to tell you how I did it. I had a old oil can and mixture in there, and I'll lay it out and light it. I do not recommend that.
Yeah.
But a drip torch is $150, and that's about all you need because you always have a rake and
Yeah.
a hoe around somewhere
Other
you can
than
use.
Getting your training and permit and
Yeah.
that sort of stuff.
Get
so
some buddies to help you, and it's so easy to get into.
Yeah. We have a couple of other episodes talking about where to find resources and the tools and stuff that you might want to have on hand to do that. But any others?
My take-home message would be be a friend of Burner Bob. And when you're out there on your properties, you don't have to burn your whole property at once.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
a great one.
You want
We don't have to burn the whole thing at once, and you don't want to, even and for most objectives at least.
to, like, I've heard Dr. Harper say it before, Dr. Craig Harper before, the use of prescribed fire is kind of like an art. Be an
Mhm.
artist with it.
Yeah.
Paint your landscape.
Yep.
And
Create diversity.
Be like Bob Ross. Be like, we'll drop a little tree over here. Light it on fire. No,
Yeah,
don't do that. Don't light the trees.
Just a little dab right here.
Yeah.
Is that all?
I guess the
Jacob?
only thing I would say is these days the information is at your fingertips. I mean, there's
Yeah,
fun
it's a
little
world.
pamphlets. You don't have to read
Yeah.
big documents. I mean, you can look at pictures. So if there's this kind of negative attitude a lot of times with fire because it can be a scary thing. But the information, quick
Yeah.
Google search will tell you exactly how to do things, when to do
Exactly.
things, and there's always
So
an
all you have to
expert
do
call.
is
So
Google at UF Deer Lab or
absolutely,
MSU Deer Lab.
MSU cares. Like there's
Yeah,
website after website.
there's all these resources available. I like that too.
Yeah,
So
I mean-
you have a world at your fingertips.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember it can be scary.
Just
So-
about every state that I'm aware of has State Forest Service with a program to get you certified to burn
Yeah.
and provide resources.
I went through the short course
Those-
years and years ago, and
Yeah.
it was, I mean,
I did it
very educational.
in North Carolina, and the thing I learned the most that I became comfortable with was fire weather and
Yeah,
being able to tell
absolutely.
before you go out in the field whether or not you should be
Yeah.
out there to start with.
Mhm.
And obviously, maybe I should have learned more as far as I was there on the side of caution, and it wasn't necessarily good enough to burn, but
Yeah.
those courses are helpful.
Try fire, you're
I
almost as
agree.
much a meteorologist as you are.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Fireman.
You get
I've
even
learned that.
even more frustrated with the weatherman than you do when you walk outside
That's
and you're
That's
going to
right.
work and it rains.
Oh, yeah. All right, guys. Well, let's go hunting.
Let's do it.
See y'all later.
See you. Thank
We
you.
appreciate it.
Fire University is part of the Natural Resource University podcast network, funded by the Renewable Resources Extension Act. If you like what you heard today in this episode, please follow us on all the social media platforms at UF Deer Lab.